Good morning. How is everyone this morning? It's another bright sunny day. But you know it's getting towards summer, right? Because you can feel the rain get warmer, so that's a good thing. We are going to be in John chapter 20 this morning. Have you ever read or watched or listened to a story and it just kind of has an unsatisfactory ending? It just doesn't conclude really well. Maybe there's a lot of loose ends and they just don't tie them up well, right? Now, some stories, right, go to the extreme to tie up loose ends. I was thinking of the last Lord of the Rings, and it's like, okay, we got the big picture here. We can just move on now, right? But some stories just leave you kind of hanging, right? And you kind of, well, that's it? That's how it's going to end? There was a film made, long before most of you around, but it's called The Italian Job, not the one that was remade just a few years ago, but the very original one, which was made way back in the 60s. And basically it's this story of a gang, and they rob all this gold in Rome, I think it is, and they make their getaway on this bus, and they have this big, stack of gold bullion stacked in the bus on a pallet, and it's a kind of windy mountain road, and in their excitement, the driver makes a mistake and the back end of the bus flies around, and the back end is now hanging off the road on this mountainside, and it's kind of teetering like that, right? And the gold is towards the back of the bus, and so they try and edge to try and get the gold, but of course every time they move towards the gold, the bus teeters more downwards, right, over the precipice, and so they edge back again, and then the leader says, "Lads, I've got a plan." And then the music comes and the credits roll, and that is the end of the film. Left with literally a cliffhanger, right, hanging over the edge of over the bus. And no, there's been a lot of conjecture about why the film ended that way. Did they run out of money? Were they going to make a sequel that never came about? And you can read on the internet that various people have worked out solutions about how they could get out of that situation, right, and get the gold and get off the bus. And I'm not going to go into all that. You can go and read that for yourselves if you are so interested. Last Sunday afternoon, Leslie told me that I too had left some loose ends from last Sunday, because I told a story about getting stuck on an island in a river, and I never really tied up the loose ends at all. I just kind of left it hanging there. Well, I'm here, right? So you know that I got off, but there's some loose ends there, right? So maybe you're interested and maybe you're not, and maybe we'll get into that a bit more, but it's not really about that this morning. Because this morning we're looking at the greatest story that was ever told and the greatest ending to a story that there has ever been. And we're talking about a man, but just not an ordinary man, a man who was both fully human and fully God, God in the flesh, who came to reveal to us what God is like. And he came to reveal to us through his words, through his actions, through everything he did. But the leaders at that time, they didn't like his story much. It kind of conflicted with their story. And they didn't really like the ending that he offered to people. This idea of forgiveness. They didn't like that. And so they captured him and they turned him over to the Romans, and he was crucified and he was dead and buried. And definitely that was not the end of the story that his followers were looking for. But 3 days later, of course, some women went to the tomb, and they found the tomb empty. Sometimes stories don't conclude the way we want them to, right? Sometimes, the worst kind of conclusion is when the hero of the story gets wiped out. and we might be thinking that, right? But that's not what happens. The women find a couple of figures in shining clothes in the tomb, and they told them to go and tell the others that Jesus is risen. Like he told you beforehand, he's risen. And You know, we have 4 accounts of this story in the Gospels. In Mark's Gospel, he actually ends at this point with the women told to go and tell all the others. Kind of seems like a cliffhanger, doesn't it? It's like, well, wait, you know. But of course, Mark is writing to an audience who already knew the rest of the story, right? So he was writing from that perspective. Matthew's Gospel, the women hurry back to tell the others, and lo and behold, they bump into Jesus himself. And then Matthew's Gospel concludes with Jesus and his disciples in Galilee, and Jesus gives them the Great Commission. All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you, and behold, I am with you to the end of the age. That's a pretty satisfactory ending, isn't it? In Luke's Gospel, he has focuses in on a couple of disciples, Cleopas and another one, who are heading on the road to this place called Emmaus, and they're joined by this stranger who pretends not to have heard any of the story that's been going on in Jerusalem over the last week. But then he proceeds to explain them the story of God from the beginning of Moses through the prophets, and why the Christ must suffer and die. And they get to Emmaus and they share a meal, and the stranger breaks bread and they see, wow, that's Jesus. And so they leg it back to Jerusalem to tell the others, to discover that Jesus has appeared to Peter. And as they're talking about it all, there is Jesus right in their midst. And Luke ends with Jesus' promise of the coming again as he returns to heaven. And that can seem like a bit of a cliffhanger, right? But of course, Luke was going to write a sequel, the book of Acts. In John's Gospel, the 2 women go and tell the disciples the good news, and Peter and John have a race to get to see the empty tomb, and John wins, and Peter goes stumbling in, and they see that it's empty, and then they go back, and Mary Magdalene comes back again, and she bumps into what she thinks is the gardener, and it turns out to be Jesus. And then later again that evening, Jesus appears to the disciples in a locked room, and there it seems like a satisfactory ending too, doesn't it? You know that there's some variation in these stories, but that's what you get when you get accounts of people telling eyewitness stuff, right? That's such a big story. And of course, the climax of the story is that Jesus is alive. He is resurrected. He is risen from the dead, and it's an incredible and an amazing, amazing story that he has triumphed over death. And what's more amazing is that can be our story too, when we place our faith in Jesus Christ. And you think, well, that's a wrap, right? The end. Except it wasn't quite the end, because there were a couple of loose ends left to tie up. And we find these loose ends actually in John's Gospel. And as we talk about these 2 loose ends, just think for a moment this morning, maybe you have some loose ends that are just need some tying up here this morning. Whatever it is in your life. And you hear the story of Jesus and you think, well, that's great, but where exactly do I fit in? And is that my ending too? Well, let's read about the first loose end, and it's John 20, 24 to 25. Now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We've seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger in the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe." You know, we don't know much about Jesus' disciples. Even the high-profile disciples, we don't know that much about them. They have different backgrounds, they have different personalities. Back in those days, they didn't have the Enneagram, and they didn't have DISC, and they didn't have Myers-Briggs. Lucky for them, right? Because I can I can never remember those letters and numbers. It's like, what was that? And it's like people talk to you like you're supposed to know what that means. It's like, I don't remember, I don't know. But there is one I do kind of like, a personality thing, and again, it's a bit old, but it's by Gary Smalley, and maybe you've heard of it. And it's simple, and I like it because he just uses 4 things, and they're all animals. And even I can remember that, right? There's a lion. Now can I remember them? There's a lion. There's an otter. There's a retriever. And there is a beaver. And of course, the lion is like the type A personality, bit of driven, go-getter. The beaver is like, the beaver is like, just show me the facts and all about information, and getting everything lined up properly. The otter is, like otters, fun-loving, life and soul of the party. And the retriever, well, it's the retriever, the loyal personality that will never leave, right? And so Thomas, we always label him as, well, he's the doubter. He's doubts. But is that really fair? Actually his name was Thomas or Didymus. He was a twin. Again, we don't know who he was twin to, but there are some mentions of him in the Gospels. In the 3 synoptic Gospels, he is mentioned every time as one of the 12 disciples that Jesus calls. In John's Gospel, earlier on, of course, Jesus' friend Lazarus dies, and they've been hanging out away from Bethany, and then Jesus says, no, I'm going to go back to Bethany. The Jews were all out to get Jesus, and Bethany, of course, is near Jerusalem, and he's had a kind of a narrow squeak, shortly before there, where people had tried to stone him and arrest him. And Thomas just goes, well, let's go back with him and die. Which can seem, great optimist, Thomas, isn't he, right? Seems kind of fatalistic and pessimistic, but really, he's loyal, isn't he? He's kind of showing that retriever trait in there, I'm sticking with you to the end here, Jesus. Before Jesus goes to the garden, Jesus tells them that he's going away and that they know the way. And Thomas says, Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? And of course, Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. So I think there Thomas is like showing a little bit of beaver, right? Just show me everything so it lines up, and then I will believe, right? And of course, as we just read, Jesus has appeared to the disciples, but there's only 10 present. Thomas was not there. We don't know where it was. Doesn't really matter where he was. But you must kind of imagine what that must have been like when he came back. It's like goes into the room and expects to find everyone else, all just where he left them, like huddled and kind of fear. Instead, the place is absolutely buzzing. Oh, Thomas, you should have been here. You remember gone into a room where someone was, oh, you should have been here. It's like, well, yeah, what? And then they start telling him about how Jesus appeared and came through the door even though it was locked, right? And had a piece of fish and talked to them. And Thomas is going, what are you talking about? He came through a door but then ate fish? It's like, no. And they were going, oh yeah, isn't it great, Thomas? Aren't you excited? And Thomas is like, no, I'm not. I haven't seen it line up, right? Show me in person. Show me the facts. Show me the evidence. And unless you show me that, I am going to reach a different conclusion. So there was a loose thread that had to be torn up. Last week then, I did tell this story about fishing with a friend, and we'd gone on a drift boat on this trip, and we'd stopped off at this island to fish, and we'd been there for an hour or two, and my friend came up to me and said, hey Bryan, the boat's gone. I was like, yeah, right, mate. And I really thought he was just pulling a fast one. He goes, no, really gone. And this friend is a good friend, and he's, but did I believe him? No, I didn't believe him. I needed to walk down and see for myself, because it's like, well, he must be wrong, right? The boat must be there. But of course he was right, and where the boat was, there was just water now. But really, the reason why I didn't want to believe him, because that changed our situation, right? Suddenly we are no longer in control. And what Thomas faced is really what we all face. Excuse me. We're told that Jesus, excuse me. We are told that Jesus is alive. And if that's true, then there's massive implications, isn't there? If what those people had seen is true, then that really changes the end of the story. That death is not the full stop. That Jesus is the conclusion. The second loose end was the other disciple called Peter. And of course, Peter is not a beaver. He is not a retriever. He is maybe an otter with some lion in him as well, I would say. Again, the otters are the life and soul of the party, the first to jump on the boat and the first to leap off the boat, right? Peter was there, the first to confess that Jesus is Lord, and, he was first to leap off the boat and walk on the water, and then he sank pretty soon after that, right? Every personality has its pluses and minuses, doesn't it, right? The lion is great, leadership and drive and all of that, right? But sometimes the lion can get so goal orientated, just forgets about people and everything. Some people get chucked under the bus in that drive to achieve the goal. The retriever can be so loyal that doesn't see the faults of the person that they're being loyal to. And the beaver can get so focused on the facts and figures and keep show me, that they just never pull the head out of their book. And the otter, of course, fantastic, wants to experience everything, but then when the experience gets old, we just move on to a new thing. When I say we, I'm definitely not an otter. So, an otter can be bounced out of something just as easily as they are bounced into it. And of course, Peter was bounced out of his faith, wasn't he? He boasted that he was going to be there, the one defending Jesus, but then he denied Jesus, not just once, but 3 times. As my friend and I, and we looked at where the boat had been, we realized that it was kind of windy that evening, and in our excitement to land and get fishing, we pulled the boat up, but who had put the anchor out? Because in our haste, right, obviously that anchor had not been put out properly. So one of us was carrying some guilt and some shame about that whole situation, and all I'm saying is that it wasn't me. Uh-oh. Let's read John 21, 1-3. And after this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he revealed himself in this way. Simon, Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples were together. And Simon Peter said to them, I'm going fishing. And they said to him, we will go with you. They went out and got into the boat, and that night they caught nothing. So that's it really, Peter's stuck on his little island of shame and guilt, and it's kind of a big loose end, isn't it? Because who is going to tie that up for him? And I think about this, and the author could have just written them out of the story, right? That's what authors do when they get to some loose ends. They just kill those characters off and carry on, right? Because let's face it, they're not exactly the main characters, are they? Or the author could have had them do something out of their personality trait. Sometimes you see that at the end of a film, you go, what? That's not what that person's like. but that would be inconsistent. And again, this morning, I bet as we look at our lives, maybe we have some loose ends. Maybe they're where we've allowed our personalities, and we all have one of those 4 different personalities in this room, and that's a fantastic thing, and that's the way that God made us, but sometimes we use them in the way that God didn't really design for us to use them. How do we tie those loose ends up? Well, the first thing we can do is that we can encourage each other. You know, what does Peter do? Well, he goes back to what he knows, doesn't he? He goes back to fishing. Can't say I can complain with that, right? And, Thomas is on the first of the list to go with him. And then there's Nathaniel. He was another skeptic, really. And James and John and a couple of others also go with Peter. And I don't know what the conversation was on the boat that night. Maybe they're still trying to convince Thomas that we really have seen the Lord and that he really is alive. Or maybe they're trying to tell Peter that, it's all right, Peter, it's going to be okay. But you know what? They couldn't offer Thomas enough proof, could they? And they couldn't give Peter enough consolation to wipe away his guilt. Because both Thomas and Peter, what they needed was Jesus himself. And sometimes we're tempted, aren't we, to kind of jump in and fix what only Jesus can fix. We don't like to see others at loose ends. And we're tempted to jump in and try and tie up those loose ends ourselves, whereas sometimes it's really just not our business, and we don't even have the power to tie up those loose ends. Only Jesus can do that. There's a story in the Old Testament where a woman called Hannah, and she doesn't have any children, and she's, it's a terrible loose end for her. And her husband says, I love you though, Hannah, aren't I worth more than 10 children to you? And it's like, that's not the point. He was trying to tie up a loose end for her that he couldn't do that. When we were on our island and we were trying to work out what to do, and the phone service down in that canyon is pretty spotty down in there, and one little bar if you're lucky. And we weren't really sure if anyone was going to come and rescue us. So what did we do? Well, we kept fishing. And that's the best encouragement that we could give each other at the time. We kept fishing. And that's the best that the disciples could do, isn't it? They can't make Jesus appear, but they can encourage each other just by being there, by coming alongside each other. I bet if we went around this room, we all have places we like to escape to, when we feel those loose ends of life hanging down, whether it's fishing, whether it's shopping, whether it's gaming, whatever it might be doing, going up to Salt and Straw and getting some ice cream, I don't know, but we all have those places we like to escape to, don't we? I think of Peter, and maybe he thought his days of discipleship were over, and that he has to go back to fishing. Some of us here this morning, this last week, have strongly felt the presence of the Lord. Maybe on Easter service or Good Friday or some other time, and we've strongly felt Jesus touch us, and we've almost like we've been able to reach out and touch him. But then maybe others of us perhaps not. We've been in a dry season. We've laid out a fleece, but there's nothing to wring out. And there's nothing around to wring out either. We've prayed and prayed, but all we hear is silence. And you listen to others, and they're excitedly talking about their experiences with Jesus and how Jesus has touched their lives and how they've practically touched Jesus. And you just go, oh, why can't that be me? Why can't I experience that? Maybe you're even embarrassed to admit that, right? Well, it must be me. It must be my fault. It must be something maybe I've done. And maybe it is. Maybe we've got distracted and we've allowed the cares of the world to neglect our relationship with Jesus. Or maybe worse, we've actually done something that we feel is keeping Jesus away from us. Or maybe we just need some more proof. And again, I can't make that happen this morning. I wish I could, right? As a church, we wish we could. We could try and manufacture that, but that's not what we're about. But we can come alongside each other, and we can encourage each other, no matter whether we feel Jesus is really present with us right now or not. You know, my favorite example of that is Ruth, where Naomi had a lot of loose ends. She'd lost her husband, she'd lost her 2 sons, and it looked like the conclusion of her story was not going to be great, right? And yet, her one daughter-in-law came alongside her, Ruth, although she barely knew God herself. She said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." So really encouraging each other is the first part to tying up loose ends. But secondly, though, we do need an encounter, don't we? 8 days later, disciples are back in the room. Thomas is there with him, and Jesus appears again. Peter's fished all night. He got skunked. Early in the morning, they're near the shore. There's a figure on the shore that they can make out through the mist. And he asks the question that no fisher person likes to answer, especially when they've been skunked, right? "How are you doing?" "Oh, and then this voice tells them to cast on the other side of the boat, and they may find some. Well, they've got nothing to lose, I suppose, so they do what this voice tells them to do, and they find not just some, but they find a net full, don't they, that almost breaks their net. And they get it ashore, and they find that it's Jesus, and that Jesus is already there, but he doesn't really need their fish because he's got his own fish, and he's got the barbecue going, and got the bread on as well, and it's like, wow. You know, when we fished on our island, it was kind of getting colder and it was starting to get dark. And we actually didn't catch anything either. Maybe it's because our minds were not fully on fishing, right? We were kind of anxiously looking up the river to see if maybe somebody might be coming down anytime soon. And finally, a boat did come into sight and rowed over to where we were. And actually it turned out that it was a sheriff. Yeah, that somebody had called the sheriff's office and he'd been on his way home and had got the call, and I'll go and grab those 2 off that island. And there he was to rescue us. And it was the encounter that we needed as we waited and watched. Was it 2 Sundays ago, Palm Sunday? Is that when Palm Sunday was? Yeah, and that's when we did our prayer walk too, right? And you know, there were several groups of us, and we went out on our prayer walk, and Jeremiah suggested to us that we should walk around this block 7 times. Not to bring the walls down, but physically speaking, but spiritually speaking, right? So me, and you can tell what personality I am here, so it's like, okay, so what are we going to do for the other 30 minutes, right? 10 minutes to walk around 7 times, and then what, right? But we didn't. It took us the full 40 minutes or so to walk around 7 times. And as we slowed down, as I slowed down, and allowed the Spirit to start to show me things as we walked around, every time round it was different. Every time round I encountered things in a different kind of way that the Lord pointed out to me. And I know that other groups that went out that day also encountered things in a different way, in different places. You know, we want to encounter the risen Lord here this morning. That's why we gather. That's why we fellowship, worship, We dig into his word, right? These are all places where we can expect to encounter the risen Lord. But we can expect to encounter Jesus in other places too. Even in Old Town, as we go out and about, if we slow down, if we listen and we watch and we hear, Jesus can encounter us anywhere, right? The first time Jesus encountered me, I was like in a dirt trail in sagebrush and juniper. Jesus can encounter us in his creation. He can encounter us here when we break pizza together, when we drink a latte, wherever it might be. Jesus knows where and how to encounter us. He knows the loose ends that we have dragging along behind us. He knows that. He wants to fill our nets this morning. But we have to let them down on the right side of the boat, and we need to let them down empty as well, so Jesus can fill them. One day, a woman went to a well to get some water, and she just wanted to get her chores done before it got too hot and get back home again. And she had a lot of loose ends in her life. And she met a man there at this well, and he asked her for a drink. And it turned out to be Jesus, and they had this long, long conversation. And she ended up going back to her town. She didn't even have the water with her. And she told everybody, "Come see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ?" She had an encounter with Jesus Christ, and she wasn't even really looking. The third part of dealing with loose ends is to examine. When Jesus appeared to Thomas, he invited him, didn't he? He said, "Right, Thomas, here you go, mate. Touch my hands. Look, there's the holes. Put your finger in the hole. Here's my hole, the hole in my side. You can put your hand in there." He invited Thomas to examine him. But for Peter, though, it was a different kind of examination, wasn't it? It wasn't that Peter was to examine Jesus, but Jesus actually was going to examine Peter. "Peter, do you love me more than these?" And when he meant these, he was looking around at the other disciples, I imagine, right? Because that had been Peter's boast. Even if everyone else deserts you, I will never do that. "Oh, really, Peter? Do you love me more than these?" So when the sheriff picked us up and we were rowing down the river, of course, I was happy that we were off the island. But I did have one slight concern in my mind. It's like, where's my boat? Oh, my boat and our gear, and where was that? And it could be anywhere, right? Fetched up under some trees, or more likely wrecked down, one of the rapids, possibly. How would I ever find it? But the sheriff had some news. He said, "Well, actually, I've got some news about your boat, is that somebody spotted it drifting down, and they saw that it was empty, and they've grabbed it, and where we're taking out, your boat's going to be there." It's like, wow. And sure enough, we got down there, and there was the boat, and you know what the first thing I did was? I examined it. See if there are any holes in it, see if there was any damage to it. And you know what? My mate was pretty happy too, because he was relieved that we'd all been reunited. So, and I bet when Jesus appeared to Thomas, right, that the other disciples, they were well made up, weren't they? Finally, now he can believe. Now you've had an encounter with the risen Lord. All your questions have been answered. And I so want all of us to see Jesus this morning. I so want us to see Jesus through his words, through his actions, through his wounds, and most of all, through his resurrection. Go ahead. Examine. Whatever you need to examine. Sometimes I feel like as Christians, we think, "Oh, don't look up, don't. But go ahead, examine anything you want, right? That's what we should tell people. We've got nothing to be afraid of. Here, let me hold the torch for you while you look, right? Shine the light in so you can really see for yourself. But how about if we're the ones that need the examination? That's a little more difficult, isn't it? Like Peter, we've got off the island maybe, but Jesus knows where we are, and he encounters us and starts shining his light into our lives and starts asking us questions about loose ends that make us feel kind of uncomfortable. I don't know about you, but I don't like that kind of examination so much. Maybe you do, but me, not so much. And because I know that deep down inside, right, those loose ends and I'm definitely going to be found wanting. And that Jesus is going to ask that same question, Bryan, do you love me? And how will I answer that question? It's like the first question that God asks, the man and the woman after they've eaten the fruit that he told them not to eat. There were actually 3 questions that God asked. Where are you? Who told you? And what have you done? Do you love me? And that's the step that we all need to take if we want the loose ends of our lives tied up. And Jesus asked Peter 3 times that question, right? Because Peter had denied Jesus 3 times in public. You can read different commentaries, and scholars will disagree over the significance that in the first couple of times Jesus uses the Greek word agape for love. That's the highest form of love, right? And Peter answers with yes, I phileo, I love you. That's like brotherly love. And scholars will argue about whether that's really significant or not. Personally, I think it is a little significant, right? Because the third time Jesus asks, actually, he doesn't use the word agape, he uses the word phileo. Do you actually love me in the way you say you love me? And what Peter is grieved by that, isn't he? And he says, Lord, you know. You know. Because examination is hard. And it's difficult. But it's essential. If we want the loose ends of our lives tied up, we have to come to that realization that we are not gods, that we do not rule our lives, and without repentance and faith in Jesus, our conclusion is not going to be so great. The author of Hebrews says, for the moment all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Which brings us to the last point, which is to engage. So doubting Thomas, on his encounter and examination, exclaims, my Lord and my God. That is a great proclamation of faith, isn't it? And Jesus' response, can seem like a bit of a put down, but I don't think that's really what Jesus meant. He says, have you believed because you've seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. And what does he tell Peter? Feed my sheep. Again, Peter and Thomas, we don't really know how their lives ended, Tradition has it that Peter was crucified upside down because he didn't want to be crucified the same way as his Lord. Again, tradition has it that Thomas went and finally fetched up in India, was killed in India. Except, of course, we do know how their stories concluded, because they concluded in Jesus Christ. They were engaged by Jesus. They had these very different personalities, they had different stories, they had different backgrounds, but they all concluded in Jesus Christ. And that's what Jesus has engaged us to do, We have these different stories, these different backgrounds, these different personalities, and we use them different ways, right? But Jesus wants us to engage. He wants us to go out and engage the world around us, right? Because we know the safety of our conclusion. If you're like Thomas, you're going to engage people by showing people the evidence, right? It's going to be all about the evidence. And if you're like Peter, you're going to engage people by being more experiential, right? And if you're going to be like, we could go on through the list, but I'm not going to do that. But just think of the way that God has created you, the personality that he's given you, and how as we work together to engage this world around us, and particularly this neighborhood around us. As Peter faced the end of his life, he wrote, "Therefore I intend always to remind you of these qualities, though you know them and are established in the truth that you have. I think it right, as long as I am in this body, to stir you up by way of reminder, since I know that the putting off of my body will soon, as our Lord Jesus Christ made clear to me. And I will make every effort so that after my departure you may be able at any time to recall these things." We've been engaged by Jesus Christ. So what's your story this morning? Hopefully it's not a cliffhanger and you're teetering on the edge. Will it have a satisfactory conclusion? You have some loose ends that need tying up here this morning. Or maybe you know someone that has some loose ends that they're really struggling with in their story. We just need to come alongside each other and encourage each other, right? Help each other. That's the first step. Point them to the places where people can have an encounter with the risen Lord Jesus Christ. Yeah, there could well be some evaluation that needs to happen too.